Fixed wooden ladders can be pretty handy. They can really smarten up a set of bunks or help you get to a mezzanine bed. I'll show you how to build a nice and solid one yourself. Now, the great thing about this project, we only need a couple of items to put it all together. Our sides, some rungs, a couple of screws and some glue. Before you get into it, make sure you are building the ladder to suit your needs. But as a rule of thumb, your ladder should be no more than 600mm wide and your rung should be at least 32mm thick. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is cut my sides to length. So I'm making my ladder 2.2 overall. Now I'm going to put a slight angle on one end just to sort of give it a little bit of form. So the next thing I'm going to do is mark out for our rungs, and I'm going to space our rungs at 250mm to the centre. So coming off the bottom, which I've left nice and square, it's going to mark 250, 500, 750, a metre, 1250, 1500, 1750, 2 metres. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is just square those marks around all four sides of our pieces of timber. Now, as you're doing this, it's really important that you have a really nice sharp pencil. If you've got a blunt pencil, it's not going to give you a nice sharp line and it could put all your measurements out. I'm now just going to set my combination square to 35mm. I got a 90mm wide piece of timber. I'm not going to set these rungs in the centre of them. I'm just going to have them slightly forward a little bit more. We are going to put a foot on the back. The reason I'm going to put these rungs just a little bit more further forward, it just gives me a little bit more scope when you're standing on the rungs that your foot is a little bit further off the wall. So I'm just setting that to 35mm, and then I'm just going to mark where it hits our rung line, and I'll do that on both sides of the timber. So the next thing I need to do is cut my dowel. Now I've got 8 rungs, I need to chop 8 lengths of this. Now, the overall width of my ladder is 500mm. Now I'm going to allow the dowel to penetrate past the side of my ladder 10mm, so that's 520mm. I'm going to cut these. That way, when the ladder is all nice and dry, I can cut the excess off. The next thing I have to do is drill all the way through. Now I'm using a 35mm dowel, so what I'm going to use is a 35mm Forstner drill bit. These are really nice and sharp. It's going to give me a really good, accurate cut. So what I'm going to do is drill halfway through, flip it over, and then carry on from the other side. The reason I'm going to do that is because if I was to carry on drilling all the way through from one side, it's going to blow out the back and it's going to be pretty ugly. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can go about this. I can use my battery drill and keep that really nice and plumb, or I can just use a drill press like over here, which I'm going to use. I've screwed a piece of ply to the base of my drill press and just put a little back guard on there. So all I need to do is slide my side through and just drill on my marks. Now I'm just going to go halfway through, flip it over, and then do the same on the other side. So the next thing I need to do is cut a slot in the end of my piece of timber like I've done here. Now the reason for that is once my dowel goes through the side of my ladder, I'm going to put a wedge into that slot. And then so what's going to happen is that dowel is going to slightly spread and the wedge in there is going to hold that dowel into the side of the ladder really nice and tight. Without that, the glue's just going to sit in there and that could eventually force out. Now there's a couple of different ways you can actually cut this. Now I'm going against the grain. As you can see, the grain is going sideways that way. I'm going to put this straight up and down perpendicular to that line. The reason for that, when my wedge goes in, it's going to stand out a lot more as if I was going with the grain. Now the next thing I'm going to do is mark 30mm back from that line just to make sure when I actually cut through I'm not going to come any further. The reason for that is the width of my side of my ladder is 30mm and I'm sticking out 10. So what that allows is the wedge to go in 25mm. Sweet, now just do the same for all the rest. So I'm going to make my wedge 90 millimetres long by about 12 millimetres wide. So not too fat, quite nice and sharp. So I'm just going to sit that nice and square across the back of my table, and I'm just going to pull that around till it's approximately on that angle. Next thing we need to do is put some PVA glue inside our holes, and then we're going to insert our rung. Now I just want this to protrude through 10 millimetres. Okay, so that's pretty good. So now all I have to do is exactly the same for all the rest. Okay, that's lovely. Now, if you're really worried about making sure all these slots line up, you can do so, but I'm not too worried. I kind of like it that they're a little bit random, that they're not all in a nice straight line. Now, I've just thrown some 10mm packers underneath, so that just sits on the table quite nicely. Next thing I need to do is take a square and just make sure that my dowels are all sitting nice and square. They're all looking pretty good. That could go over a millimetre. Excellent. Right, next thing I'm going to do, take some sandpaper, and I'm just going to sand up the edges of the top of the dowel, just so when I put my other side on, it's not going to catch on any little daggy bits. The next thing I'm going to do is take a couple of packers and I'm going to clamp them to our rungs. Now the overall of my ladder is 500 millimetres. The thickness of my sides is 35 mil. So if I take 500 and 70 mil, the difference of that is 430. So I've cut these packers 430 mil, and all I'm going to do is just clamp that temporarily to my rung. So when I put my other side on, I know exactly the height to go to. Primo. Now all I have to do is glue up the other side like I did the first and slip that over. So I've just applied glue to every hole. Now all we're going to do is roll it onto the rungs. Now there's no great easy way to do this. You just have to line up each rung and tap away gently. Hammer this side on until the rungs protrude 10 millimetres, just like the other side. Now applying a liberal amount of glue, just force that into your slot. Do that on all of them. And then we'll insert our wedge. Now you just want to insert that wedge really nice and tight, pretty much till the wedge can't go any further. Now as you're going, it's quite good to have a damp rag on hand just to clean up any little bits of muck that goes onto your timber. When you're done, do the same for the other side. Now I've just let that set overnight, so I'm ready to cut these off. Now a wee little tip when cutting these off, just put your saw approximately 1 mil or 1/2 mil off the edge of this, and we can always sand that down flush. If we put our hand saw hard up against that, we're going to get the teeth marks on the side of our timber, and that means it's just going to take longer to sand it down later. Now just repeat the same for the rest. And then give the sides a sand with your belt sander until they're nice and flush. Okay, I'll just cut some blocks that I'm going to screw to the back of my ladder. So just remember, we did set our dowels to the front of our ladder, and we are going to fix these to the back. Now, all I've done is cut that 180 millimetres long, and I've cut a 15-degree angle. You can cut whatever angle you like. So I've pre-drilled a 3mm hole in the centre of that block. Now I've got a 150 millimetre long bugle screw that I'm going to put through the block into our piece of timber. So I've already got one set up here. Now I've just protruded that bugle screw through about 2 millimetres. Now I'm just going to set that up in the middle between our two rungs. And all I'm going to do is use that screw to give myself a little mark. So that's just left a little impression on the back of our ladder. So we can go through with our 3mm drill bit and pre-drill a hole. So I'm just going to apply a little bit of PVA to the back. And just making sure we're nice and flush. Lovely. Wipe off any excess glue, and when it's set, give the whole ladder a finer sand with your orbital sander for a nice smooth finish. You can then stain, varnish or paint to suit. If you're installing the ladder to a set of bunks, screw it in place from behind using coach screws. If you're installing the ladder onto a wall, then you'll need to use 4 heavy-duty 90-degree brackets, and make sure you're fixing it to something solid. If you're unsure how to fix it, check with a licensed building practitioner. All done. There's your completed ladder. It looks pretty good, and it was easy as.